Ito, sa to ka.
That kind of a marker on public property. This is public property. But the manager wasn't here that day, so the sign got erected by mistake, and it's still here. I think it's a very nice story of James and Ellen White. So this is a family plot. The first person who was buried is up here by the fence. Her name is Clarissa. She was a nanny for James and Ellen White's children.
Oh, she's not a White.
She's not a White. She came from New York to here. She died very early in their career in Battlecreek. She died in 1856, quite soon. She was the first one buried here. And then there's Mrs. John White and Mrs. Deacon John White. That's James' parents. If you go to the village today, if I have the honor of giving you a tour, we'll talk about he was a deacon at the church or one of the churches. One day his grandchildren saw him out on Sunday morning cobbling shoes. He was a shoemaker, saddle maker, shoemaker. And the grandson walked across the street and said, "Grandpa, you know what day it is today?" He said, "Yes, it's Sunday." And I decided to join the sun later. So the next plot is John Herbert and Henry White, the two children, the doorpost, so to speak, the youngest and the oldest. The baby died from a strep infection at 12 weeks old. And it was a long, lonesome buggy ride to this cemetery from their home for Henry, who was then about 13 years old. And he died later in Massachusetts from pneumonia. He was out ice skating on some wet ice, caught a cold, and had some complications and had pneumonia. He was being prayed for by his parents because they thought they were going to lose him. He asked his parents, he said, "Will you bury me with John?" He thought Jesus was going to come very soon. He said, "I don't want John to be all alone when the angels pick him up." So these two are here. And then here's mother and father. And then the other two boys are over here. Other two boys, one of the boys had a first wife die, so there's two. There's Emma and Ella. And then down the side is another nurse, Mrs. Chase, who was a nurse to the family. Now this is an obelisk, and it's a sign of the Masonic belief, but the Whites were not Masonic believers. It's just a traditional marker for that time that they had placed that back then. So all the graves that have, for instance, the yellow flags or the white historic Adventist flags are Adventist grave sites here.
Hi, John.
Those who weren't on the bus might have noticed that it said Oak Hill Cemetery 1844 on the archway. This is not an Adventist cemetery, but it just happens that that's when the cemetery was established. Yes, sir.
That obelisk was there since...
It's recent.
Oh, so it's very recent.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, maybe that's 1960s.
Chris. Tatay Chris.
What is the value value right here?
Yes.
Where?
This says father and this says mother, so Mrs. White must be here. I think the feet are this way.
Oh.
This large stone off to the side belongs to the father of John Harvey and W.K. Kellogg. His name was John P. Kellogg. The Kellogg's had over a dozen children. 2 or 3 of them were Adventists and worked at the sanitarium. WK was the superintendent of the John Harvey was the superintendent. Behind Kellogg's is Cyrenia Smith and his wife Louisa. As you'll hear later, Joseph Bates visited the most honest man in town who was a merchant. He was directed to him because Joseph Bates asked the postmaster, "Who's the most honest man in town? I have some very important, timely truth to share with him." And the postmaster said, "That would be David Hewitt." So David Hewitt, Cyrenia Smith, someone named Lyons, and John P. Kellogg each donated $300 in 1850s, 2 years' income, to bring James and Ellen White and the Review and Herald Press to Battlecreek. So that's how the Battlecreek became included in this and moved away from New York, as you heard in church service this morning.
I have a question.
So all the Kellogg children are next to their parents there. Yes.
How many children does Ellen and James White have? That are alive? Or
They had 4 boys,
Yeah.
and all of them have passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, they have grandchildren,
yeah. Oh, okay.
many
And they're all,
grandchildren.
the children are married here?
The children are here, not the
Not the
grandchildren.
Yeah, the children.
Yeah. So this is John
John
and Henry,
13 years old.
and over here is Willie White.
Really?
And
Dalawa yung asawa kasi nung isa, kaya dalawang babae.
the other son. What's his name? I can't remember.
Some members of the family, the wife in Battlecreek.
No. Mrs. White outlived her husband by 35 years, 40 years, and they most likely moved to California when she did.
But Ellen G. White died at Haven, right?
Yes,
In California, right? Yeah.
yes, that's a good point. Mrs. White died and she lived born in 1827 to 1915. She died in California. They had a service for her there, and then she was shipped by train to Battlecreek. Then they had a service for her here. It was on Sabbath, December. It was a memorial.
It was at the tabernacle,
It
right?
was at the tabernacle.
Oh, really?
There were 5 tabernacles there are 5 Adventist churches in Battlecreek. This is the 5th Battlecreek church.
Where are the other churches?
They have recently, they were small, so they outgrew them. And not like all the churches, but some of them just became old and were torn down.
So right now there's only one.
Just one. That was started in 1927.
That's a picture.
Yes, here's a little brochure about the churches. Maybe you can share that with your church.
Biriyan.
Out east? Oh. Ellen White was born in, I believe, in New Hampshire, on the East Coast. I don't know what her heritage is from that point. James and Ellen met out there. There's one other, I mentioned to those on the bus, some of you who were in the cars, there were several copycat cereal companies that came to Battlecreek after Kellogg started. And one of them was the C.W. Post cereal company. And
They're still around?
it is alleged that he visited the sanitarium kitchens while he was a patient there and borrowed some cereal recipes from Dr. Kellogg. And he started his own cereal company. On a good, non-windy day, you can smell cereal in the cemetery because the food company is just a mile from here. If the wind's blowing this way, you can smell Post Toasties or something. The reason I mention that is this mausoleum over here, the largest structure you can see, is the post mausoleum.
Oh.
It covers 60 grave sites. There's about a dozen grave sites here. It covers 60 grave sites. That's how the cemetery sells space.
Ano daw itong flag na?
And there's 100 tons of marble, polysilver talent.
Planetarium na.
Walang English naman siya sinasabi. Philosophy yan. Di ba dapat, explain mo, dapat mapupurihan siya.
Asan ni nanay ko? Nay? Nay?
It never used to be like that.
Miss Sarah?
Mrs. White was also an abolitionist and believed in freedom for slaves, as well as she spoke in meetings about the freed slaves. As a matter of fact, the Review and Herald was not permitted in the South of the United States because of its anti-slavery positions back before the Civil War. And there are several significant things that happened in relationship to the Civil War in Mrs. White's time that she had something to say about. So now it's a good time for
Ay,
buffet.
yalamang.
All right.
Yes, put your arm on Iggy's elbow. There you go. Up it. AB, move your... Yeah, there you go. Move your right foot closer there. And... Oh, RJ, you're too tall. Lower yourself so that your elbow's touching the grave. Yeah.
Don't try not to line.
Oh, Joe, what? You have to shoulder feet. Move back. Move back more. We had a photo bomb. Iris, get out!
What we doing with the phone? Take a picture with the phone.
You get it?
Oh, to the side. Hey, one.
Oh, it's so cold.
Stay there, guys. You're gonna froze.
Sideways, sideways, sideways. Ah!